the morning of February 18th, 1915, President Woodrow Wilson sat down with members of his cabinet to view a special presentation. The presentation was to be a motion picture, the first of which had ever been screened in the White House. For weeks, papers around the country talked of this new motion picture. A grand spectacle, some papers called it. Not all press was positive. Rumors had quickly spread of the film's negative depictions of African Americans. Wilson reserved this judgment until the screening was over. When the feature finally concluded, he reportedly said,
"It's like history written with lightning, and my only regret is that it's just so terribly true."
The film that Wilson and his cabinet saw that evening was the infamous Birth of a Nation. Whether or not these words were actually spoken, or was a marketing ploy by the film's director, there is no question that many viewed this film as an authentic recreation of historical events. A writer for the New York Evening Journal wrote on March 16, 1915,
"Children must be sent to see this masterpiece. Any parent who neglects this advice is committing an educational offense, for no film has ever produced more educational points than Griffith's latest achievement."
The film, which told the story of the Civil War and Reconstruction, was infamous for its portrayals of African Americans. Many took the recreations in the movie as fact, with papers arguing that the film's director, D.W. Griffith, had created a fair reconstruction of the war that had concluded over 50 years prior. In a way, Wilson was correct when he said the film wrote history, as images of Southern valor and the lost cause narrative would plague history textbooks for years to come. Griffith himself believed that in time, cinema would be the chief way to teach history. In an interview in March 1915, he said,
"The time will come when children in public schools will be taught practically everything through moving pictures. Certainly they will never be obligated to read real history again."
Film can hold more power over public perception than a history textbook ever could. While 107 years have passed since its release, The Birth of a Nation planted the seed of how movies could influence public perception. How do movies warp our understanding of historical events? Is it becoming ingrained more than real history? Using the American Civil War as a case study, a clear demonstration can be made of how film influences our perceptions of history, and how they can distort views in the modern day.
Look away, Dixieland, in Dixieland, where I was born, early on a frosty morning. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland.
Long before the first motion pictures were ever invented, historical revisionism had already begun to take hold in the decades following the war, during the Reconstruction period. White Southerners, unable to bear the humiliation of their defeat, attempted to justify the war with the Lost Cause movement. It was the belief that the war wasn't about slavery after all. Instead, they were fighting for states' rights, and the oppression from a tyrannical North. It caught on like wildfire, plaguing the literature and the history of the time. Bitter memories of battlefields turned into romantic, patriotic struggles of valor. The issue of slavery was conveniently pushed to the side, with emphasis being placed on the struggles of the white Southerner. This mindset spread to a new medium, film. It can be argued that the birth of cinema and the Civil War are closely linked. Some of the most successful early one-reelers were dramatized depictions of Civil War stories. One of the most famous of these directors was D.W. Griffith. He sought to portray the war in a more romantic setting, obscuring the truth with a clean slate of honor. There was zero mention of slavery or race in any of these productions. Instead, the emphasis was placed on the brave Confederates defending their homes. Just a few years later, Griffith would go on to direct his greatest achievement, The Birth of a Nation. It can be argued that The Birth of a Nation was the first blockbuster. It was a film that almost everyone, both North and South, saw. Audiences seemed to love the film. Novelist Robert Hughes even went so far as to say,
"It is to the advantage of the color today to know how some of his ancestors misbehaved, and why prejudices in his path have grown here."
Many sincerely believed that this was an authentic recreation of the Old South, while the truth was otherwise. Perhaps most infamously, the film resurrected the long-since disbanded Ku Klux Klan. The Klan, which had been disbanded since 1872, was resurrected due to the film's popularity, with membership reaching a record high in 1925. Without Birth of a Nation, it is unlikely this would have happened on the scale that it occurred.
And about your mother staying up night after night sewing robes for the Klan. The Klan at that time was needed and served a purpose.
You feel as though it were true?
Yes, I feel so. True as that blade.
The films that came after Birth of a Nation would paint the antebellum South as a paradise, where slaves were part of the family or happy to serve their masters, while the truth couldn't be more different. People have become nostalgic for an era they had never lived in. For example, the opening poem of Gone with the Wind paints the antebellum South as a land of cavaliers and cotton fields, knights and their ladies fair, of master and of slave. A civilization gone with the wind. Southerners had finally gained on the screen what they had lost on the battlefield. The question remains to be asked, why are we having this discussion now? Birth of a Nation came out 107 years ago. Gone with the Wind 83 years ago. Aren't these films products of the past? What happens in the past can often plant the seeds of what is to come in the future. Very few people have read interpretive books about the causes of the Civil War, but millions have seen Gone with the Wind. Even extending to the modern day, the mindset of the lost cause still plagues many classrooms around the country. There are many schools across the American South that still frame the Civil War as the War of Northern Aggression, despite what history obviously indicates. The state of Alabama celebrates Confederate Memorial Day as a state holiday. Even in 2022, the images of the Civil War still haven't left us. Would this mindset exist if films like Birth of a Nation didn't start it? If we would like to take this even further, in 2017, for example, the Charlottesville riots were a product of white supremacist groups protesting the removal of a Robert E. Lee statue. It is doubtful that many of these protesters were there because they had read a history textbook. Rather, they were there for the media that they had consumed. Many Americans may not have seen Birth of a Nation, but they most certainly have been affected by the products of it. This is not to say that every Civil War movie is harmful, but it raises the question of how movies influence history. In the case of the American Civil War, it is an inconvenient truth that many Southern Americans are descendants of slave owners. Instead of facing their complicated legacy, they would rather manufacture a new past, in order to believe that they were good and righteous. Film has become a new tool to teach history. Whether it's used to distort history or teach history is entirely up to us.